Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for bearing with us, and apologies for the few minutes of delay. You're very welcome to today's press conference following the 7th round of negotiations with the United Kingdom. I'm here with Michel Barnier, the European Commission's chief negotiator, who will walk you through this week's negotiations, and then we'll have time at the end for a few minutes of questions. So, without further ado, I pass you the floor, Mr. Barnier.
Thanks, Dan. Bonjour à chacune et chacun.
Good day, everyone. I hope that despite the serious health crisis that we face with its economic and social implications, well, I hope despite all this you've been able to have a restful break this summer. I'm very happy to join you again at the outcome of this 7th round of negotiations with the British negotiating team. With David Frost and his team, we have maintained regular contacts over the weeks of August. And starting on Monday, we had continued discussions throughout this week for face-to-face discussions. And I would like to thank the UK negotiating team for having come to Brussels despite all the practical difficulties because of the COVID crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, we continue to work very actively, at the same time taking all due precautions for those taking part in the negotiations. Ladies and gentlemen, we have very little time left to conclude these negotiations, to ensure that that an agreement can enter into effect on the 1st of January 2021 in 4 months and 10 days. 4 months and 10 days from now, so that a full legally valid text for that goal would need to be ready by the end of October at the latest, in order to leave sufficient time to the Council and to the European Parliament on our side to approve. We therefore still have 2 months left to find agreement on all the issues under discussion, to consolidate the text and to finalise all the technical annexes, which are far from negligible, and then to have our legal experts verify and validate the text in all the language versions. This is a long and complex task. Any delay beyond the end of October would entail a serious risk as to the successful outcome of this process. In this context, those who were hoping for negotiations to move swiftly forward this week will have been disappointed. And unfortunately, I too am frankly disappointed and concerned and surprised as well, I must say, because the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson told us in June that he wished to speed up the negotiating process during the summer. But this week, once again, as in the July round, the British negotiators have not shown any real willingness to move forward on issues of fundamental importance for the European Union, and this despite the flexibility which we have shown over recent months in terms of taking on board and working with the 3 red lines which Boris Johnson himself set out in June, namely on the role of the European Court of Justice, UK legislative autonomy, and on fisheries. We still haven't seen from our British partners any willingness to take on board the EU's priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing surprising whatsoever about the EU's priorities, because they have not changed since 2017. If I could invite you to have a look again at the conclusions of the European Council, resolutions of the European Parliament, we have said repeatedly since 2017 what are our priorities for a balanced and fair agreement with the United Kingdom. And we continue with great patience and goodwill to repeat these. We must have a fair, any trade agreement must go hand in hand with fair standards, mutually agreed standards, a level playing field. We then need, secondly, we need to have a long-term perspective for European fishermen, and thirdly, there won't be any cherry picking. We won't have a la carte access to the internal market because of Brexit. If Britain refuses to accept the rules and obligations of the internal market. Brexit means Brexit. These are not dogmatic or technocratic or ideological approaches by the European Union. There's nothing tactical about this. We have to put this point across clearly, underscoring these priorities, which we have repeated over the last 4 years. We have human, social, economic, environmental needs to defend, which remain of fundamental importance for us and which we have to defend. Let me take a very tangible example, that of road freight transport. And this is something which, in the United Kingdom, we've seen this in recent days in the British press, has given rise to a lot of emotion. 4 years after the Brexit referendum vote, what is happening are the clear and direct consequences of the Brexit vote. No one should be surprised at that in Britain. Road transport is a key sector for our economies. It represents millions of jobs in Europe, and it is a sector which also has a direct impact on logistical costs for our businesses, prices paid by consumers. It has a direct impact on pollution and climate, and indeed on road safety as well. The British negotiators do not want certain standards to apply to British carriers when they are present on the territory of the European Union. That was repeated again this week. This applies to working hours, to installing modern tachographs in lorry cabins in order to verify working hours and rest times for workers. They have refused to agree to these guarantees on the one hand, but on the other hand, they are asking for a level of access to the internal market comparable to that of a member states which do accept these standards and constraints. Let me just repeat, the United Kingdom has decided itself to leave the single market and has therefore decided to lose the benefits of the internal market. It is Britain's choice, not ours. So, in any case, why should we give access to our roads, to road transport firms, which would not be subject to the same rules in terms of minimum standards and safety? And why should, when it comes to the aviation sector, why should we grant the same access to British operators, to British carriers, as to EU carriers if they are not bound by the same standards in terms of environmental protection and consumer protection? In the same way, why should we agree to the British government being able to create competitive distortions directed against our companies, for example, in granting subsidies or providing derogations in terms of environmental standards or working standards, without any clear regulatory framework agreed between us? So we can see, between underscoring these rather technocratic words, level playing field, but what we're talking about are protecting thousands of jobs in our member states. It's about workers' rights, it's about consumer rights, it's about health, and it's about protecting our environment. Our President, Ursula von der Leyen, has said very clearly that we are prepared to compete with British companies, provided that this competition is fair.
The need for a level playing field is not going to go away. Even if the UK continues to insist on a low-quality agreement on goods and services only. It is a non-negotiable precondition to grant access to our market of 450 million citizens, given the UK geographic proximity and the intensity of our economic exchanges. We are asking for nothing more, but nothing less than what Prime Minister Boris Johnson committed to in our joint political declaration last October, together with the 27 EU leaders. I have a slide for you, not new. Here is a small reminder of those commitments, which were also endorsed by the current UK Parliament, by the way, and supported by the European Parliament also. In particular, paragraph 77, where we agreed, and I quote, "Our future agreement must encompass robust commitments to prevent distortions of trade and to prevent unfair competitive advantages." And I continue to quote, "We should uphold the common high standards applicable in the Union and the UK at the end of the transition period, 4 months from now, in these areas," I quote, state aid, competition, social and employment standards, environment, climate change, and relevant tax matters. This is the political declaration agreed between us and the UK government. And that is what modern trade policy is about. Not just lowering tariffs and removing quotas. It's about finding agreement between sovereign parties on the rules that will govern future trade. As Commissioner Phil Hogan often says, a modern trade policy must contribute to upholding or even raising rights and standards in the interest of citizens, consumers, and sustainable development. We hear the British government's concern about maintaining its sovereignty and its regulatory autonomy, and we respect that clearly. But no international agreement was ever reached without the parties agreeing to common rules. No international agreement. And I can predict with absolute certainty this will also be the case of trade agreements between the UK and other partners in the future, such as the United States, Japan, and Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, apart from the question of a level playing field, there are still many other areas where progress is needed, and, for example, obviously fisheries, where we have made no progress whatsoever on the issues that matter. Governance, where we are still far from agreeing on the essential issue of the dispute settlement. Law enforcement, where we still struggle to agree on the necessary guarantees to protect citizens' fundamental rights and personal data. And also mobility and social security coordination, where our positions are also remain far apart. Nonetheless, to be fully objective, I should add that in some of the 10 tables that convened this week, we were able to make progress on technical issues, for example, on energy cooperation, participation in union programs, and anti-money laundering, among others. And this will be useful when it comes to consolidate together a final text, provided we are able to agree on fundamentals first. However, too often this week, it felt as if we were going backwards more than forwards. Given the short time left, what I said in London in July remains true. Today, at this stage, an agreement between UK and the European Union seems unlikely. I simply do not understand why we are wasting valuable time. Mesdames et Messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen, as you will have understood, on the European side, we are very concerned about the state of play in our negotiations. And to be perfectly candid, we don't see how delaying the most difficult issues until later would help us reach a better agreement. We will have to start working on consolidating the legal text. We're willing and able to do that. We already proposed a comprehensive text in March. The British side too have proposed British texts on various issues. But it will only be possible and useful to produce a consolidated text if we do so working together, not each of us on our separate sides. And if we do all of this in parallel, I do hope that this point will come across clearly to our British partners. But we haven't reached that stage yet, because at this point in time, the only serious prospect would be an offer from the United Kingdom would be zero quotas, zero tariffs, without any agreement on the level playing field and without any balanced agreement on fisheries. This is a non-starter, a no-go for us, because it simply blocks everything. Last week, we heard Boris Johnson in his meeting with Taoiseach Michel Martin stressing his desire to reach an agreement with the European Union. He's already said that to us, and that is what we hope for too. I think it is still possible, despite the relatively short time left to us. But in order to achieve this, our British partners will need to come forward with clear, constructive proposals during the next round to take place in London from 7th to 11th of September. Ladies and gentlemen, in parallel with these very complex negotiations, we continue with Vice President Maroš Šefčovič. We continue to be very vigilant on the proper implementation of the withdrawal agreement by 31st of December of this year. As regards the Northern Ireland Protocol, the recent statements by Prime Minister Johnson have stressed how sensitive this issue is, but we hope that the United Kingdom will do whatever is necessary to ensure effective implementation of the legal obligations on both sides in this protocol, which has now been ratified.
Implementation of the protocol is the only way to preserve Ireland's all-Ireland economy, to protect the integrity of the single market, and, above all, to ensure continued peace and stability on the island of Ireland. And in saying this, I want to pay tribute once again to the dedication and determination of John Hume, who sadly left us a few weeks ago.
Coming to one particular aspect of this withdrawal agreement, which we need to implement, citizens' rights, we continue to pay close attention to the full implementation of this agreement on both sides, for EU citizens living in the United Kingdom and British citizens living in EU countries. We are following up on both sides the proper implementation of the commitments set out in the withdrawal agreement. We're working in close collaboration with civil society and with citizens' associations who were present or represented during the second meeting of the Specialised Committee on Citizen Rights, which took place on 6th of August. We see as a key priority tackling the ongoing COVID-19 crisis with all its very serious economic and social consequences everywhere. Nonetheless, despite this priority linked to the COVID-19 crisis, we have to be realistic too in terms of preparing for and facing up to the big changes which will come into play as 1st of January next, the date as of which Britain has opted for economic and trade Brexit. And with or without a trade agreement, there will be major implications. That is a direct consequence of Brexit, and that is why a few days ago the European Commission began a virtual tour of our capitals to accompany national administrations in preparing for Brexit, effective Brexit. We have published a readiness communication in all 23 official languages, taking on board the implications for all players in the European Union, all the measures which our businesses, administrations, and other stakeholders will need to take in order to be as fully prepared as possible for a very new and very different situation as of 1st of January next. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, at the outcome of this round. The next round is scheduled for the week starting on the 7th of September. And in the meantime, with David Frost and his team, we will continue working over and stay in contact over the next 2 weeks, above and beyond the negotiation process and above and beyond the issues on our negotiating agenda. It is the points of substance, which I have already mentioned, which need to be addressed.
Phrase, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking.